It was the Great War, the bloodiest war in the history of Europe and the world. It was World War I. A single bullet fired set the entire world ablaze. Millions of victims fell around the globe. It began on horseback and ended on tank turrets. It ended with a bitter peace. At the 11th hour of the 11th month of year, on the 11th day, the world experienced its final moment in World War I. For years of war and destruction had passed, leaving behind 10 million dead on the battlefield alone, and approximately 20 million wounded, in addition to about 7 million civilian casualties, both dead and wounded, from all over the world. But first, we must return to the reasons that led to the outbreak of this bloody war, going back to 1914 in Vienna, which was one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. The wealthy enjoyed everything in the new civilized life of the 20th century, while workers and peasants toiled long hours for meager wages. European countries controlled colonies in various parts of the world, and each aspired to gain a larger share. The most voracious was Germany, which had already acquired parts of French territory and desired more colonies outside Europe. Similar to France and Britain, there was a triple alliance between Britain, France, and Russia, and the Germans had no choice but to ally with the Austrian Empire. But the Empire Austria was a ticking time bomb, encompassing nations and peoples of diverse cultures and ethnicities, particularly in the Balkans. The Balkans, in particular, were a tinderbox, waiting to be ignited. Serbia, after the Balkan Wars, had become a formidable power, aspiring to annex more Slavic territories. However, the time bomb exploded in Sarajevo, Bosnia. On June 28, 1914, Archduke Franz Fernandez, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife, Sophie, were assassinated in Sarajevo. They were shot by a young Serb named Gavrilo Princip, a member of a nationalist group supported by elements within Serbia seeking to end Austrian control over Bosnia. Prior to this incident, a conspirator had attempted to throw a bomb at the Archduke and his wife's motorcade, but failed. When the motorcade stopped by chance, the young Serb managed to shoot the Archduke and his wife. Initially, it appeared to be a random accident, but what followed? It was unexpected, as the Austrian Empire accused Serbia of being behind the incident. However, Serbia had entered into an alliance with Russia, which would not abandon its ally. Russia was under the rule of Tsar Nicholas II, who had only one heir to the throne, his son Alexei, who suffered from hemophilia, a serious blood clotting disorder. A small wound could end the life of the crown prince, and this was a dilemma that troubled Tsar Nicholas II. There were several marriage alliances between royal families in Europe, which were supposed to help establish peace. However, Russia would not abandon Serbia if it were attacked by the Austrian Empire. Germany was a strong ally of Austria, and if Germany entered the war on the side of Austria, Britain and France would inevitably join the war on the side of Russia, Serbia's ally. Fears of a major war were growing in Europe. Therefore, in July 1914, French Prime Minister Raymond Poincaré paid an official visit to Russia to confirm his support should war break out. France also wanted to support Russia in the event of war between it and Germany. This visit was one of the strong reasons for bolstering the Austrian Empire's position in preparing for war. On July 23, 1914, before the French Prime Minister returned home, Austria sent a strongly worded message to Serbia containing impossible conditions. Serbia, of course, rejected some of the conditions. The Austrian Empire had already declared general mobilization, and the army was being prepared for war. On July 30th, 1914, Tsar Nicholas II ordered the mobilization of the Russian army on the borders of the Austrian Empire. Emperor Wilhelm II cut short his vacation on his luxurious yacht, and, upon his return, sent an ultimatum to the Russian Tsar, demanding the withdrawal of his army from the Austrian border. On August 1, 1914, Germany declared war on Russia. World War I had begun, but in Europe, there were still advocates for peace. People feared war. Markets were filled with people buying food and supplies. Panic spread throughout Europe. Jean Jaurès, a prominent French thinker and politician, opposed the war and called on labor unions across Europe to uphold peace. However, he was assassinated on July 31, 1914, by a young French nationalist. The voice of peace was silenced. In France, church bells tolled. Everyone knew that war had begun. On August 3, 1914, Germany declared war on France. Wilhelm I believe that Russia was unprepared for war and that France will not be able to support Russia. Millions of young men and workers from Germany and the Austrian Empire were gathered. On the other hand, in France, all men between the ages of 20 and 48 were gathered to defend the homeland. On the 4th of August 1914, Germany invaded Belgium according to the Schlieffen Plan, a plan devised by the German General Alfred von Schlieffen. As Germany feared a war on two fronts, the pre-established plan relied on invading France through Belgian territory. The Franco-German border was heavily fortified. After invading France through Belgium, Germany intended to advance its forces towards Russia. However, this plan provided Britain with a pretext to enter the war, as Belgium was a neutral country, and the German army's entry into Belgium violated the treaty. The Germans expected a swift and decisive victory, but Belgium resisted fiercely, displaying remarkable courage against the German army. This slowed the Schlieffen Plan, which relied on a rapid, lightning attack through Belgian territory. The Belgians disrupted roads and railways to halt the German advance. Meanwhile, the Austrian Empire anticipated an easy victory over Serbia, but the Serbs resisted fiercely and inflicted heavy losses on the Austrian army. Military service in Britain was voluntary, so men and young men everywhere were called upon and encouraged to volunteer to defend the country. In France, Plan 17 was implemented, a plan that relied on retaking Alsace and Lorraine, French territory seized by the Germans after their defeat in the French-Prussian War. Attacks also aimed to achieve a swift victory and boost morale. On August 7, 1914, the French entered Mulhouse and held a military parade. The French infantry were adorned with level rifles, which were relatively heavy and unsuitable for trench warfare. Just 3 days later, the French forces retreated from Mulhouse after a surprise attack by the Germans. As the German army advanced into Belgian territory, panic spread, and civilians tried to flee. On August 20, 1914, the Germans entered Brussels, committing brutal massacres, destroying villages and towns in their path, and looting everything. In Germany, on the Eastern Front, the Russians crossed the border and entered East Prussia. Similar to the Belgians, the Germans fled after the looting and killing perpetrated by the Russian army. Upon hearing news of the German advance towards Paris, Parisians rushed to the banks to empty their accounts, and families fled the inferno of battle. On August 20th, the Russian army underwent rapid mobilization in East Prussia. The Russian army consisted of 400,000 men, mostly peasants, taken from farms and villages and driven to war without knowing what awaited them. On August 26, 1914, the Battle of Tannenberg took place in East Prussia, north of Poland. The German army, under General Paul von Hindenburg, numbered 200,000 men, while the Russian army, under General Alexander Samsonov, numbered 400,000. The Russian army split into two, unable to support each other. The Germans exploited this division and surrounded the Russian army. It was a crushing defeat. Between 30,000 and 50,000 Russian soldiers were killed or wounded, in addition to 90,000 Russians taken prisoner. In this battle, General Samsonov decided to commit suicide by shooting himself. General Hindenburg was promoted to the rank of Field Marshal. Between August and September 1914, the Battle of Galicia took place. The Russian army attacked and captured the city of Galicia, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, inflicting heavy losses on the Austrian army. This forced Austria to request support from Germany. On the Western Front, 7 German armies, totaling 2 million men, attacked France along the Belgian-French border. The French army was exhausted and retreating, its uniforms ill-suited for war. France brought in infantry from its African colonies, who appeared unprepared for the battle. The French chief of staff ordered his officers to fight to the last man. There was no room for retreat. Execution awaited anyone who tried to flee the battlefield. As the fighting intensified, hundreds of thousands were wounded. Girls from wealthy families volunteered to work as nurses to care for the injured. Between September the 6th and 12th, 1914, the First Battle of the Marne took place between the German army and the British and French armies, led by French General Joseph Joffre. Near the Marne River, the French fought fiercely to defend Paris. Germany was on the verge of ending the war prematurely, but this battle prevented the fall of Paris. French General Joffre succeeded in rallying the French army, which was crumbling before the German forces, and halted the German advance on Paris. However, despite the victory, France suffered heavy losses. On July 31, 1917, the Battle of Passchendaele took place, one of the worst and bloodiest battles of World War I. The battle occurred near the town of Persepolis, at the village of Passchendaele. The opposing sides were the French and British armies, the latter including troops from Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, as well as the Belgian army, against the German Empire. The objective of the battle was to break the German lines in Flanders. The German army was under the command of Erich Ludendorff, while the Allied forces were under the command of British Major General Sir Douglas Haig and several other commanders. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and this battle became a symbol of the destruction and devastation of World War I. Returning to November 1, 1914, Pope Benedict delivered a speech calling for peace, brotherhood, and love in the world. At the start of the war, Britain, with the help of Portugal and Belgium, attacked German colonies in Africa, Asia, and the Pacific, aiming to seize strategic waterways and acquire the resources necessary to sustain the war machine. On August 23, 1914, Japan declared war on Germany in support of Britain. According to the Anglo-Japanese Treaty of 1902, Japan also sought to control German colonies in the Pacific. In October 1914, Japan launched its attack on the colony of Shandong, capturing the port of Kaohsiung and the surrounding areas. Japan also occupied German islands in the Pacific. On the other hand, Wilhelm II visited Istanbul, the capital of the Ottoman Caliphate, to forge an alliance with the Turks against Russia. While Mehmed V was the nominal ruler of the Ottoman Empire, real power lay with the Committee of Union and Progress, headed by 3 individuals: Anwar Pasha, the Minister of War; Kemal Pasha, the Minister of the Navy and commander of the Ottoman forces in the Levant; and Talat Pasha, the Minister of the Interior. Anwar Pasha amassed approximately 1 million men and planned a campaign to attack the Caucasus, hoping that the Muslims in those lands would revolt against Russia in support of the Turks. Between December 1914 and January 1915, the Battle of Sarikamish took place between the Ottoman Empire and Russia. The Ottoman Empire hoped to regain the territories seized by Russia and simultaneously exert pressure on the Eastern Front in favor of Germany. However, the results were disastrous, one of the worst defeats in Ottoman history. The campaign failed, and most of Anwar Pasha's men perished, either from the cold or from enemy attacks. The committee needed a scapegoat to justify this crushing defeat. The scapegoats were the Armenians, a Christian minority living within the Ottoman Empire. The educated elite living in Istanbul were executed, and the remainder were forcibly deported to the desert. particularly the Syrian desert. In February 1915, the Allies attempted to capture Istanbul, the Ottoman capital, to control the Dardanelles and Bosphorus Straits, and force the Ottoman Empire out of the war. After the battles of the Dardanelles and Gallipoli, the Allies suffered a crushing defeat. The Turks possessed powerful artillery and had laid mines in the waterways, and the Allies lost a number of warships. The Allies attempted a landing at Gallipoli, but the Turks resisted fiercely under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who would later become the founder of modern Turkey. In January 1916, the Allies withdrew in a major defeat. On May 23, 1915, Italy declared war on the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and later in 1916, it declared war on Germany. Although Italy remained neutral in the early months of the war, it supported Germany, and the Austrian Empire were both involved in the war. But Britain and France promised Italy a portion of Austrian territory, leading Italy to join the Allies.